Imagine waking up on a quiet suburban street in the early 1950s. The sun rises slowly, spreading a pale gold light across rows of freshly painted homes. The air carries the scent of cut grass and warm asphalt. A single car, heavy, chrome-trimmed, and full of promise, rests in a driveway that didn't exist just a few years earlier. Somewhere inside, a radio hums to life, crackling as it warms, playing a familiar tune that floats gently through the home. This was America at daybreak. The war had ended, the world had exhaled, and a new chapter of everyday life was just beginning. For millions of families, this decade would become a memory they carried deep in their hearts. A simpler time, they'd say. A hopeful time. A time when the American dream felt like something you could touch with your bare hands. The 1950s were more than a decade. They were a moment suspended in history. A time shaped by peace and prosperity, yet shadowed quietly by distant tension. A time when families grew, neighborhoods blossomed, music exploded, and the rhythms of daily life shifted into something new, something distinctly American. This is a journey back into that world. A warm walk down quiet sidewalks, past white picket fences, through living rooms lit by black and white TV glow, into diners alive with jukebox melodies, and into hearts shaped by the promise of tomorrow. This is the way we lived, a peaceful journey through 1950s America. Setting the stage. To understand the gentle beauty of daily life in the 1950s, we have to begin at the nation's emotional starting point, the sigh of relief that followed World War II. After years of sacrifice, rationing, uncertainty, and loved ones overseas, America stepped into a new era. Soldiers returned home, families reunited. Streets once filled with wartime posters and ration stamps now echoed with the sounds of children at play. The first wave of what would become the baby boom. Factories that once manufactured tanks and aircraft shifted to household appliances, refrigerators, washing machines, and televisions. Modern conveniences that felt like magic to families experiencing them for the first time. And with the help of the GI Bill, a new world opened for returning veterans. Affordable home loans, education, and the possibility of a peaceful, middle-class life. A dream once distant was suddenly within reach. For many, the 1950s felt like a sunrise. The heart of this story. In this documentary, we'll walk gently and carefully through the post-war boom that changed everything, the explosion of suburban life and the new American neighborhood, family routines that shaped childhood memories, the music that set the rhythm of a generation, the television shows and movie stars that defined entertainment, the peaceful moments people still remember today, and the shadows of the decade, the Cold War, civil defense drills, and the early stirrings of civil rights that gave the era depth and complexity. Each chapter will unfold like the turning of an old photo album. Every scene drawn vividly, so viewers not only hear the history, but feel it. This is not just a lesson. It is a memory. Your memory, perhaps, or your parents', or your grandparents'. A connection to a time when things moved a little slower, when neighbors waved as they passed, when music felt new and electric,
and when America stood at the beginning of a profoundly transformative chapter. Now, let's step fully into that world. The year is 1950. The war is over. The dream is beginning, and the story of how Americans truly lived is about to unfold.
Chapter 2: The Post-War Boom and the Rise of the Middle Class. A nation rebuilding, a dream unfolding. The 1950s did not begin with noise or spectacle. They began with quiet rebuilding. The steady hum of factories switching gears, the rustle of new blueprints across office tables, and the soft confidence of a nation ready to move forward. World War II had left its marks on hearts and landscapes, but it also left the United States in a position unlike any it had experienced before. While much of Europe and Asia faced the long, painful process of reconstructing cities and economies, America emerged with its industrial engine intact, stronger even, and poised to define the global future. And so began one of the greatest economic booms in modern history. The GI Bill, a launchpad for millions. They came home young, often barely in their 20s, with medals, duffel bags, and a yearning for normal life. For these returning servicemen, the Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944, widely known as the GI Bill, was nothing short of transformational. For the first time, millions of Americans had access to low-cost home loans, college tuition assistance, vocational training, business loans. This single piece of legislation reshaped American society. It created the first true mass middle class. Men who once saw home ownership as a distant dream could now afford a house with a yard, a garage, and room for a growing family. And they did, in numbers the country had never seen before. Factories of peace. During the war, American factories became engines of conflict, producing tanks, aircraft, ships, and military technology on a massive scale. When peace arrived, those same factories pivoted. The metal that once became bullets and bombers now became refrigerators, washing machines, automobiles, radios, televisions, toasters, fans, air conditioners, and 1,000 other household conveniences. Products that had been rationed or unavailable during wartime were suddenly accessible, shiny, modern, and designed to make life easier. For the first time, American families could fill their homes with objects that symbolized comfort, progress, and modernity. A new cultural language emerged, one defined by chrome, polished metal, pastel colors, and the soft hum of electric appliances. This was the beginning of the modern American household. The boom in numbers. The statistics of the decade tell their own story. Between 1950 and 1960, family incomes rose dramatically. Home ownership soared. Poverty rates dropped. Consumer spending exploded. Credit became widely accessible. By 1960, nearly 87% of American households owned a television, a dramatic rise from just a fraction at the decade's start. Car ownership doubled. Suburban housing developments sprang up as far as the eye could see, each one a promise of upward mobility. For many families, the 1950s were the first time they had enough not just to survive, but to dream. A culture of possibility. In living rooms across America, fathers in crisp suits set down their briefcases after a steady day of work. Mothers in neatly pressed dresses prepared dinner while the radio played softly in the background.
Children hurried home from school to catch their favorite shows on the brand new television sets. There was a rhythm to daily life, a sense of forward motion, an optimism that felt nearly universal. This optimism was reflected in everything: the neighborhoods, the advertisements, the music, the movies, the cars, the inventions, and even the way people spoke about the future. Technology promised convenience. Education promised opportunity. Work promised stability. And America promised a better tomorrow. For many, the 1950s were not just a decade, they were a feeling of safety, a feeling of pride, a feeling that the world was expanding and that ordinary families were finally at its center.
The foundations of the middle class. This booming economy didn't just lift wallets, it lifted spirits. The idea of being middle class became almost synonymous with being American: a respectable job, a reliable car, a home and a quiet neighborhood, and a growing family became the markers of a successful life. For millions, this dream came true. For others, it was still out of reach, a truth we will explore in later chapters. But for now, in the early 1950s, the nation basked in the glow of unprecedented opportunity. This prosperity shaped everything: how people lived, how they spent, how they raised their children, and even how they saw themselves. It created a cultural identity, one built not just on wealth, but on hope. A nation in motion. By mid-decade, American life had transformed so dramatically that even those living through it could feel the shift. Streets once quiet or rural bustled with new businesses. Neighborhoods sprouted like freshly planted gardens. Young couples filled maternity wards across the country, and car dealerships became symbols of freedom and modernity. The country was not just growing, it was speeding forward. And at the center of this rapid transformation stood the American family, fuller, happier, more confident in the future than almost any generation before them. Closing reflection of Chapter 2. As America stepped confidently into the 1950s, it carried with it the gratitude of peace, the momentum of growth, and the belief that life was moving upward. A profound optimism settled over the nation, the sense that the world had been rebuilt with them in mind. But where did all this prosperity lead? Where did these young families go once they had their new homes, new cars, and new appliances? They went to the suburbs. The next chapter takes us there, to the neatly trimmed lawns, the uniform rows of houses, the community barbecues, and the shared dream that defined the era.
Chapter 3. The Rhythm of America. Music, Radio, and Entertainment of the 1950s. Opening atmosphere. Imagine a living room in 1954. Lamplight glowing softly. A family gathers around a polished wooden radio. Warm tubes humming quietly. And then, a voice fills the room, smooth, confident, familiar. It was more than entertainment. It was a ritual, a soundtrack for a generation finding its joy after the storms of war. Section 1. Radio, the beating heart of the American home. In the 1950s, radio wasn't background noise. It was the center of the home. Before television took over, families didn't stare at screens. They listened. They imagined. They felt. Every evening, radios delivered a world far bigger than the living room. The Lone Ranger, with its galloping hooves and heroic fanfare. Gunsmoke, where the Wild West crackled to life through sound alone. Fibber McGee and Molly, bringing laughter that echoed through kitchens and hallways. Edward R. Murrow, steady and authoritative, guiding the nation through world events. For many Americans, the radio wasn't entertainment. It was a companion, a friend, a comforting presence in a decade devoted to rebuilding, restoring, and rediscovering joy. And perhaps the most magical part, every voice, every story, every song was shared at the same time, a nation linked by invisible waves drifting through the night air. Section 2. The birth of rock and roll, when the world started to move. Then came a sound that changed everything. A sound full of electricity, rebellion, rhythm, and possibility. Rock and roll wasn't just music. It was a cultural earthquake. Teenagers, a brand new cultural force in the 1950s, were the first to claim it, and it was theirs alone. Bill Haley and his Comets broke the silence with Rock Around the Clock. Chuck Berry turned guitar strings into lightning. Little Richard exploded onto the scene with joyful chaos and unmatched charisma. And then Elvis, the boy from Tupelo who shook his leg and shook the world. His voice had gospel warmth, his moves had rhythm and danger, and his style, part country, part rhythm and blues, created something nobody had heard before. Rock and roll did not politely enter American life. It kicked the door open, turned up the volume, and invited a new generation to dance. It was more than music. It was freedom, a sign that America's spirit was changing, becoming younger, louder, more expressive. Closing reflection, the rhythm that held a nation together. The 1950s were not just a decade of progress and rebuilding. They were a decade with a heartbeat, steady, warm, full of music. Radio brought the world into the home. Rock and roll awakened youth and energy. Television opened new windows. Movies let Americans dream bigger than ever before. And through it all, one truth remained. Music and storytelling held America together. In joy, in uncertainty, in the quiet moments when the world seemed to glow a little softer. The rhythm of the 1950s wasn't just something you heard. It was something you lived. And for many, it still echoes today. Chapter 4. The Heart of Home, Family Life and Daily Routines. Section 1. Morning Rituals, the Sound of a New Day. In 1950s America, mornings had a rhythm all their own. The day often began not with alarms, but with the soft crackle of the radio warming to life on a kitchen counter. A cheerful announcer's voice drifted through the house, reading headlines, sharing weather, playing the first songs of the day. In some homes, the brand new television flickered awake, snow and static giving way to black and white cartoons or morning shows. Children watched in pajamas. Mothers prepared breakfast. Fathers skimmed the newspaper at the table, coffee steaming beside them. Breakfast itself was simple, comforting, familiar. Toast with butter, farm eggs, oatmeal or cream of wheat, fresh oranges or grapefruit, and always milk poured into tall glasses. The kitchen felt alive with warmth, the aroma of percolated coffee drifting down hallways. Morning light filtered through patterned curtains. Clocks ticked. A new day began with a sense of order, steadiness, and hope. Section 2. Women and Homemakers, the Art of Keeping a Home. While the nation celebrated modern inventions and new prosperity, the quiet backbone of daily life was the American homemaker. The role was immense, a full-time commitment filled with unseen skill and care. She ran the household like a conductor, planning meals, ironing clothes, managing the home budget, cleaning with pride, handling bills, appointments, and schedules, caring for children from morning to night. Aprons tied around waists, recipes clipped from magazines, laundry drying in the sun on backyard clothesines, polished floors, fresh flowers in vases. This wasn't just work. It was the creation of an environment, a sanctuary. The homemaker crafted a world where every member of the family had space to grow, relax, return, and belong. And though often overlooked in history books, she shaped the emotional heartbeat of the decade. Section 3. Childhood Freedom. Playgrounds, sidewalks, and safe streets. For children, the 1950s felt like one long summer afternoon. Safety wasn't a question. Neighborhoods were networks of trust. Everyone knew everyone, and every parent watched every child. Children played outside from morning until the street lights flickered on. Hopscotch chalked on sidewalks, marbles scattered in the dirt, bicycle bells ringing down quiet streets, jump ropes slapping pavement, roller skates clattering over driveways, baseball or stickball games stretching across empty lots. Playgrounds were simple but beloved. Metal slides warmed by the sun, seesaws creaking gently, swing sets where kids tried to touch the sky. And on hot days, garden hoses became fountains of laughter. Kids ran barefoot through cold streams of water, shrieking joyfully as neighbors watched from porches. It was childhood without screens, childhood without schedules, childhood built on imagination and freedom. Section 4. The Living Room, the nation's new gathering place. By the mid-1950s, the living room became more than a room. It became a stage. A polished black and white television sat proudly in the corner, often placed inside a wooden cabinet. It broadcast a world far bigger than the walls around it. Families gathered after dinner, the glow of the TV flickering across their faces. Programs weren't just shows, they were shared moments. I Love Lucy brought nationwide laughter with Lucy's odd jobs and unforgettable mishaps. Leave It to Beaver painted the picture of a gentle, idealized family life. The Honeymooners echoed the humor and chaos of everyday marriage. The Ed Sullivan Show introduced music acts that soon became legends. Hours passed without anyone checking a clock. Children sprawled on rugs. Parents rested side by side on plaid sofas. Snacks were simple: popcorn, pretzels, or apples sliced in bowls. Television unified the household. It offered comfort, connection, and stories that quietly shaped American culture.
Section 5. Civic life, community, togetherness, and the local spirit. Community life was the heartbeat of 1950s America. People didn't stay inside, they stepped out into neighborhoods built on connection. Churches were full every Sunday, not just for worship, but for fellowship and social life. Potluck dinners, choir rehearsals, Sunday picnics, these were weekly rituals that bonded communities. Local events filled calendars, 4th of July parades, school concerts, community dances, Friday night football games, town fairs filled with corn dogs, homemade pies, and carousel rides. Neighbors gathered on porches. Men discussed the latest news or sports. Women shared recipes, stories, and support. Children played tag under streetlights while parents sat nearby, talking softly as the evening cooled. It was a decade defined by togetherness, real, physical, warm togetherness. People belonged to their towns, their church groups, their clubs, their neighborhoods. And in that belonging, they found a security that shaped their entire view of the world. Closing reflection. The heart of home. Daily life in 1950s America unfolded with a rhythm that felt steady and safe. Mornings were warm, homes were cared for, children roamed freely, evenings were shared together, weekends belonged to community. It was a decade where the smallest routines, breakfast around the table, children's laughter drifting through open windows, families gathered around a glowing screen, became some of the era's most timeless memories. For many, these memories are not just moments. They are anchors, treasures, the pieces of life that shaped who they became.
Chapter 5. Entertainment and Pop Culture. Section 1. Television's Golden Age. By the early 1950s, television became the new gathering place of the American home. A glowing box with a small black and white screen, yet it changed everything. Families arranged their living rooms around it. Dinner dishes were cleaned quickly so everyone could settle in. Children sprawled on the carpet. Parents leaned back in armchairs. The entire room softened under the flickering light of a newborn medium. This was the golden age of television. Some shows weren't just popular, they defined the decade. I Love Lucy, Lucille Ball's comedic genius, her chaotic adventures, her impeccable timing. The entire nation laughed together. The Honeymooners, the everyday joys and frustrations of a working-class couple, honest and raw. Dragnet, straightforward, clipped dialogue, a sober look at police work that felt incredibly real. The Lone Ranger, the echo of galloping hooves, the mythic promise of justice in the American West. The Ed Sullivan Show, the national stage where new stars were discovered, where families met musicians, comedians, and performers who would shape pop culture for decades. Television didn't simply entertain. It connected. It unified. It made Americans feel as if they were living one shared story. Section 2. Hollywood. Glamour, stars, and big screens. While television warmed the living room, Hollywood ruled the nation's imagination. Movie theaters glowed on Friday nights. Neon signs flickered. Families lined up beneath marquees, popcorn in hand. And on the screen, legends were born. Marilyn Monroe embodied glamour and vulnerability. Her presence was magnetic, her voice soft yet unforgettable. Grace Kelly stepped through scenes with elegance that felt almost royal. And Elizabeth Taylor dazzled with beauty and fire. And James Dean, with his brooding intensity, captured the restless spirit of America's youth, a new kind of star for a new kind of generation. Films carried emotion like music. All About Eve revealed the sharp edge of ambition and fame. Sunset Boulevard showed the shadowy side of Hollywood's dreams. Gentlemen Prefer Blondes sparkled with color, humor, charm. Rebel Without a Cause spoke directly to teenagers who felt misunderstood, offering a voice they had never heard before. The golden age of movies didn't simply entertain the nation. It shaped its dreams, its fashion, its identity.
Section 3. Art and Design. The Suburban Aesthetic. Beyond the screen, the look of America was changing too. The 1950s became the era of suburbia, not just as a place, but as a feeling. New neighborhoods spread across the country, filled with tidy lawns, modern homes, and families building fresh beginnings. Architects embraced clean lines, open spaces, and optimism. Houses often featured large picture windows that invited sunlight into the living room, open floor plans that encouraged togetherness, sliding glass doors leading to patios and backyards, pastel colors, soft greens, pale yellows, powder blues. Inside, the design reflected a belief in convenience and modern living. Built-in breakfast nooks, shiny chrome fixtures, knotty pine basements, streamlined furniture with tapered legs. This was mid-century modern design, simple, practical, and boldly futuristic. American architecture also flirted with the excitement of the atomic age. Drive-ins, diners, and motels popped up with starburst patterns, boomerang shapes, sharp angles, and neon signs that glowed like something from the future. Entire communities, like the glass-walled neighborhoods designed by forward-thinking architects, looked like they were lifted straight out of tomorrow. To walk through a 1950s suburb was to walk through optimism itself, a belief that family life, comfort, and progress were all within reach. Section 4. The Aesthetic Legacy. The pop culture and design of the 1950s created a world that felt bright, modern, and full of possibility. Television made families laugh together. Movies gave them dreams larger than life. Architecture gave them homes that felt fresh, airy, and hopeful. It was a decade where culture wasn't just consumed, it was lived. It shaped moods, it shaped expectations, it shaped the very idea of American life. And today, when people think back to the 1950s, they don't just remember the shows or the stars, they remember the feeling. Warm evenings in front of the TV, Saturday matinees at the theater, pastel-colored kitchens, neighborhoods filled with promise. The 1950s didn't just create entertainment and design, it created a lifestyle, one that still lives in the memories of those who experienced it and in the imagination of those who wish they had.
Chapter 6. Music, from crooners to rock and roll. If you close your eyes and drift back to 1950s America, the first thing you'll likely hear is music. Not just background music, music that lived in every kitchen, every diner, every back seat, and every teenage heartbeat. The soundtrack of a country learning to breathe again after war and finding its rhythm in hope. the age of the crooners. Before rock and roll shook the world, the 1950s opened with a gentler voice. Smooth, elegant, carefully orchestrated, the Great American Songbook was still king. You heard Frank Sinatra on living room radios, Nat King Cole, warm as a sunset, drifting through evening windows. Perry Como, Dean Martin, Doris Day, singers who made every note feel like a letter written just for you. Their songs wrapped the decade in comfort. They were the sound of family dinners, quiet nights, and couples slow dancing in narrow kitchens after the kids went to bed. This was the music of stability, polished, romantic, familiar, and for a little while, it seemed like it would last forever. But America's youth were hearing something else in their bones. A pulse, a beat, a spark ready to explode. The birth of rock and roll, a single guitar riff, raw and electric. Then came the sound that changed everything. It didn't enter politely, it kicked open the door. A mixture of gospel, rhythm and blues, country twang, and pure teenage energy. A sound adults didn't understand and teenagers didn't want to live without. At the center of it all, Elvis Presley, a kid from Tupelo who walked into Sun Studios and rewrote American culture in 2 minutes and 10 seconds. When he sang "That's All Right," the world tilted. Parents gasped, teenagers screamed, and a new era began. Alongside him came the pioneers. Chuck Berry with his unstoppable guitar and stories of cars, girls, and freedom. Little Richard exploding across stages with makeup, glitter, and wild piano thunder. Buddy Holly, shy but brilliant, creating melodies that would echo for generations. This wasn't just music. It was rebellion with rhythm. It was youth discovering its voice and turning the volume all the way up.
Closing the chapter. From the velvet voice of Sinatra to the electric shock of Elvis, from polished ballads to pounding bass lines, the music of the 1950s wasn't merely heard, it was felt. It carried America through change, through rebellion, through joy, and into a brand new era. And for millions, it still lives in the heart like a familiar melody that never truly fades.
Chapter 7. Underlying Tensions, the Cold War, and Civil Rights. As peaceful as 1950s America looked on the outside, a different story lived underneath. The decade was warm and familiar on the surface, new homes, new cars, new music. But beneath the optimism, two powerful forces shaped everyday life. The fear of the Cold War and the long fight for civil rights. These weren't distant politics. They were realities woven into classrooms, neighborhoods, living rooms, and dinner conversations across the country. Cold War anxiety, living in the shadow of the bomb. Every American household carried an unspoken fear, the possibility of nuclear war. Children in elementary schools practiced duck and cover drills, hiding under wooden desks as if they were shields against a world-ending blast. Teachers instructed them with calm voices, even though everyone understood the truth. The drills weren't really protection, they were reassurance. Families watched newsreels showing test explosions blooming like deadly white flowers in the desert. Maps of Russia appeared on black and white TV screens. Terms like fallout, air raid, and civil defense entered the vocabulary of everyday life. Even the sky felt suspicious. Every passing jet stirred a moment of unease. Yet somehow, life continued. People planted rose bushes. They grilled hamburgers in the backyard. They sent kids to school each morning. Americans learned to live in two realities at once: ordinary days and extraordinary danger.
Propaganda and civil defense, danger in the American home. This fear wasn't left to imagination. It was reinforced through posters, public service films, government pamphlets, and school assemblies. Civil defense guides taught families how to seal basements with masking tape, how to store canned food, how to identify warning sirens. Advertisements encouraged homeowners to build fallout shelters, sometimes right next to their brand new Chevy. Magazines printed diagrams showing where to hide in your own home, between two interior walls, under a staircase, or behind stacked boxes of books. The message was simple and constant: be ready. Danger could come at any moment. And yet, Americans adapted. They laughed. They worked. They raised children. They found strength in routine, refusing to let fear define who they were. The civil rights movement begins: hope, pain, and the fight for equality. While the Cold War shaped America's fears, another struggle shaped its conscience. The early 1950s were years of deep racial inequality. Segregation controlled schools, neighborhoods, buses, water fountains, and entire communities. Black Americans faced daily injustice, restrictions, discrimination, and laws designed to limit opportunity. But the decade also carried a rising spark of courage. In 1954, the Brown versus Board of Education decision declared segregated schools unconstitutional. It was a turning point, one that shook the nation. Some celebrated, others resisted violently. But the wheels of change had begun to turn. Grassroots organizers, ministers, students, and everyday citizens joined the growing movement, marching, protesting, pushing the nation to confront what it had long ignored. This was not easy progress, but it was brave progress. It was the beginning of a new chapter in America's moral story, a chapter written by people who refused to accept injustice as a permanent truth.
Race and housing: the inequality behind suburban dreams. The 1950s suburban boom looked like a symbol of prosperity. Rows of neat houses, green lawns, safe streets, brand new appliances proudly displayed in bright kitchens. But the truth was more complicated. These new communities, backed by government loans and real estate policies, were not open to everyone. Black families were routinely denied mortgages through discriminatory lending practices. Entire neighborhoods used written covenants to exclude them. Real estate agents steered families away with coded language and artificial restrictions. Even when a black family had the money, many doors remained closed. So while white families built generational wealth through homeownership, black Americans were left with fewer opportunities, fewer resources, and neighborhoods neglected by public investment. This wasn't just unfair. It shaped the economic reality of generations to come. The American dream was not offered equally, and millions felt that truth every day. Closing the chapter. The 1950s are remembered for peace, progress, and warm nostalgia. But beneath that glow lived fear, conflict, and unfinished business. A nation caught between the dread of nuclear war and the promise of civil rights. A country striving to be better, yet divided by old wounds. These tensions didn't erase the beauty of the decade, but they remind us that even in the most nostalgic moments, history is never simple. It is a tapestry, woven with hope and heartbreak, joy and struggle, dreams and reality. This was the hidden heartbeat of 1950s America. Quiet, powerful, and impossible to forget.
Chapter 8: Economic Contradictions and Hidden Realities. The 1950s are often remembered as a golden decade, the era of new homes, new cars, and new beginnings. A time when America seemed to stand on the edge of endless possibility. But if you walk a little farther down those quiet streets, past the trimmed lawns, the two-car garages, and the glow of the living room television, you'll find another side of the story, one that didn't always make the magazines, one that nostalgia sometimes forgets. Not everyone was part of the boom. While suburbia thrived, many Americans lived in places the boom never reached. In inner cities, from Detroit to Chicago, from New York to Los Angeles, aging buildings stood crowded and cold. Families struggled in small apartments with peeling paint and unreliable heat. Factories offered long hours but low pay. Opportunities were uneven, sometimes non-existent. For many minority communities, Black Americans, Mexican American workers, Native families relocated under federal programs, the ailing economy felt like something happening to someone else. New highways carved through old neighborhoods, jobs moved out to the suburbs, public services declined, and the bright promise of prosperity dimmed at the city's edge. The American dream was shining, but its light didn't fall evenly. Living standards back then. The truth behind the nostalgia. When we look back now, the 1950s can seem simpler, gentler, like a warm photograph faded around the edges. But memory has a way of smoothing the rough places. The truth is, life then could be hard, even in the suburbs. Homes were smaller, medical care was limited, food choices were simpler because options were fewer. Many families lived paycheck to paycheck, quietly hoping the car wouldn't break down or the roof wouldn't leak. There were moments of joy, yes, Sunday dinners, neighborhood barbecues, and children playing until the streetlights flickered on. But there was also quiet worry beneath the surface. A father coming home tired from a factory shift, a mother stretching the week's groceries just a little further, a child noticing the difference between what their family had and what others did. This was the reality behind the nostalgia, a mixture of hope and strain, comfort and compromise. A decade held together by the determination of ordinary people who wanted something better, even when better felt far away. Consumer debt, the hidden cost of the American dream. As consumer culture exploded in the 1950s, a new idea took root: buy now, pay later. Credit cards were emerging, installment plans filled mailboxes. Stores encouraged families to take home the newest refrigerator, the newest television set, even if their wallets weren't quite ready.
It felt exciting, empowering, modern. But for many families, it became a quiet burden. Bills arrived faster than the paycheck, debt grew heavier, and the pressure to keep up, to match the ideal suburban image, became a private weight few talked about. Behind the picture-perfect living rooms and sparkling appliances, some households lived with constant financial tension, a tension hidden behind smiles, Sunday suits, and the glowing optimism of the era.
Closing the chapter. The 1950s were beautiful, but they were not perfect. For every memory of comfort, there was another of quiet struggle. For every booming suburb, there was a forgotten neighborhood. For every family thriving, there was another working twice as hard just to stay afloat. And yet, this is what makes the story of the decade so human. It wasn't just a time of triumph. It was a time of perseverance. People built lives in the space between hope and hardship. They dreamed, they worked, and they found moments of happiness even when life was far from easy. The golden glow of the 1950s shines brighter when we remember all sides of it, the light, the shadows, and everything in between.
Chapter 9. Leisure, Community, and Social Life. If the work week defined responsibility, the weekends and evenings of the 1950s defined togetherness. This was a decade where Americans didn't need much to have a good time. Just good company, a warm night, and a little gasoline in the tank. Leisure wasn't complicated. It was communal, wholesome, and filled with simple joys that linger in memory, like the glow of a porch light at dusk. Drive-in theaters, diners, and soda fountains. Nothing said 1950s America quite like the drive-in theater. Families packed the station wagon with blankets and snacks. Teenagers arrived in polished Chevrolets and Fords. Silhouettes leaning close behind fogged windows. The giant screens lit up the night sky with westerns, romances, and sci-fi adventures. It wasn't just about the movie. It was the feeling of being part of a small, temporary community under the stars. And after the show, the night often continued at diners and soda fountains. Neon lights buzzing, chrome stools spinning, soda jerks sliding root beer floats down the counter, milkshakes thick enough to stand a spoon in, jukeboxes glowing like little time machines, inviting kids to pick a favorite song before heading home. This wasn't fast food. It was a ritual. A place where first dates happened, where friends gathered after school, where time seemed to slow down just enough for a memory to take root.
Road trips and car vacations. The 1950s were the dawn of the road trip revolution. New highways stretched across states like ribbons of promise. Gas was cheap. Cars were bigger, shinier, built for long miles and long stories. Families piled into the car, kids in the back seat with comic books, moms packing sandwiches and wax paper, dads unfolding road maps on the hood. Destinations were simple: national parks, beaches, roadside motels with flashing signs, tourist traps with hand-painted billboards. But the journey, the drive, the shared experience of watching the American landscape roll by, that was the real vacation. It was freedom. It was discovery. And it brought families closer in a way few things could. Community events, the social heartbeat of the 1950s.
Community wasn't something you searched for in the 1950s. It was all around you. Church socials brought whole towns together with potluck dishes, homemade pies, and folding tables lined with casseroles. Public picnics filled parks with blankets, badminton games, and lemonade jugs sweating in the sun. Neighborhood cookouts turned backyards into gathering places, where the smell of charcoal drifted from one fence to the next. People knew their neighbors. They borrowed sugar, exchanged stories over clotheslines, and kept an eye on each other's kids without being asked. Life wasn't perfect, but it was shared. The role of church and civic organizations. Churches and civic groups played a central role in shaping the rhythm of everyday life. Sunday services weren't just religious gatherings, they were community anchors, places where families connected, where news spread, where support was found in times of need. Organizations like the Lions Club, Rotary Club, women's guilds, PTA groups, and veterans groups brought people together for service projects, charity, and local leadership. These weren't background institutions. They were the backbone of civic identity. They organized parades, blood drives, charity auctions, Christmas pageants, and summer fairs. They fostered responsibility, pride, and belonging, values that carried through the entire decade. Local news, radio dramas, and family radio hours. Even as television took hold, radio remained the heartbeat of many homes. Families gathered around wooden radio consoles to hear local news, delivered in steady, dependable voices. Radio dramas where cowboys, detectives, and space explorers lived in your imagination. Family radio hours, a nightly appointment filled with comedy, variety shows, and storytelling. Radio created togetherness. It taught people to listen, not just to messages, but to each other. And in that soft glow of tube-lit dials, with the living room dim and quiet, the world felt smaller, warmer, closer. Closing the chapter. Leisure in the 1950s wasn't about luxury. It wasn't about screens or schedules or online distractions. It was about people, shared meals, shared stories, shared moments. It was the slow magic of summer evenings, the excitement of a movie under the stars, the comfort of neighbors who felt like family, the warmth of communities that defined their lives by connection more than convenience. These were the memories that shaped the decade, and for many, the memories that still shine the brightest. Chapter 10. The Legacy of the 1950s. As we reach the end of our journey through 1950s America, a single truth becomes clear. The decade didn't just belong to its own time. It shaped the country we live in today. The homes we build, the roads we drive, the music we hear, the stories we tell. So much of modern American life began its quiet rise in that hopeful, complicated, unforgettable era. How the 1950s built modern America. The 1950s created the blueprint of the American landscape we still recognize. Suburban sprawl transformed rolling fields into neighborhoods of tidy houses and winding streets. This wasn't just real estate, it was an idea. Space, stability, and the promise of a better tomorrow. Consumer culture exploded, shaping how Americans shop, spend, and dream. Appliances, cars, clothing, toys,
mass production and advertising set the stage for the convenience-driven world we know today. And then, the roads.
The interstate highway system, begun in the 1950s, stitched the nation together. It changed where people lived, where businesses grew, how vacations worked, and how America saw itself. Those long ribbons of concrete didn't just move cars, they moved the country into its future. The world around us, from suburbs to strip malls, from road trips to fast food, carries the fingerprints of the 1950s everywhere.
Cultural influence. The decade that echoed forward. Even long after the last streetlights of the decade dimmed, its culture kept moving forward. Music from the 1950s still lives in jukeboxes, on playlists, and in the hearts of people who remember the thrill of the first electric chords of rock and roll, or the warmth of Sinatra's voice on a quiet evening. Television shows of the era shaped storytelling for generations. Family comedies, variety shows, westerns, and early dramas all became the DNA of American entertainment. And the values of the time, family, community, hard work, optimism, remained woven into the fabric of American identity. Even today, when someone imagines the good old days, they often picture the soft glow of a 1950s living room, a chrome diner booth, or a neighborhood barbecue on a summer afternoon. The decade spirit didn't fade. It settled into the collective memory.
The power of nostalgia. Why this era still matters. For millions of people, especially those who lived it or grew up hearing stories from parents and grandparents, the 1950s hold a special place. Not because everything was perfect, but because the feelings were real. The smell of fresh-cut grass, the sound of a baseball game on the radio, the spark of first love under a street lamp, the laughter of neighbors gathered around a backyard grill, the comfort of routines that made the world feel safe. Nostalgia isn't about recreating the past. It's about remembering what made it meaningful. The connections, the simplicity, the shared moments. Your audience cherishes this decade not because it was flawless, but because it was theirs or belonged to someone they loved. And revisiting it brings back warmth, hope, and a sense of community that feels rarer in today's fast-moving world.
Reflection. What we can learn from the 1950s. When we look at the 1950s with both affection and honesty, something powerful emerges. We see the beauty, the unity, the optimism, the sense of belonging, the simple joys of daily life. But we also see the blind spots, the inequalities, the fears, the divisions beneath the surface. Together, these truths teach us something meaningful. That nostalgia is strongest when it remembers the good and learns from the rest. That community, connection, and genuine human warmth never go out of style. That progress must be paired with compassion. That even the most cherished decades held both light and shadow, and recognizing both helps us honor them more fully. The legacy of the 1950s is not just what it built, but what it reminds us to value: family, neighbors, hope, music, togetherness, and the power of remembering, not to live in the past, but to carry its best moments forward. This is the gift of the 1950s,
a decade that shaped a nation and still touches the hearts of those who remember it or wish they could step back into its golden glow, if only for an hour.
Revisiting the emotional journey. We've seen a nation rebuilding its spirit after war, finding joy in backyard barbecues, drive-in movies, and Sunday dinners. We've felt the innocence of radio nights, the thrill of early rock and roll, and the comfort of familiar routines that held families together. We've walked through the beauty, the music, the community, the laughter echoing across summer lawns. And we've acknowledged the tension beneath that beauty, the Cold War drills, the shadows of inequality, the struggles hidden behind the polished surface. But together, these moments create something powerful, the true story of a decade that shaped modern American life and still lives in the hearts of those who remember it.
A moment of reflection for the viewer. Before we step away from this memory walk, I want to invite you, the viewer, the listener, the keeper of your own stories, to reflect for a moment. What memories do you carry from this golden era? Maybe it's the smell of your mother's kitchen, or the sound of your father tuning the radio just before your favorite show began. Maybe it's the feel of the vinyl car seat on a family road trip, or the way your grandparents talked about life, love, sacrifice, and hope. Or maybe your memories come from stories, tales passed down at holidays, photographs kept in old shoeboxes, or the quiet recollections shared by someone you miss dearly. These memories matter. They're not just stories, they're pieces of who we are. And as time moves forward, this channel is a place where those memories can live on. If this journey touched you, if it stirred a memory, a feeling, a moment from the past, I'd love for you to share it. In the comments, tell us what you remember, or what your loved ones passed down to you. Your stories aren't just comments, they're living history. They keep the golden glow of the 1950s alive for everyone who stops by this channel. And if you'd like to walk with us again, through more memories, more decades, more forgotten corners of American life, please like, subscribe, and join our growing family here at Golden Memory Hour. This is a place for remembrance, for peace, for connection, for honoring the moments that made us who we are. Thank you for taking this journey, for stepping back into a time when life felt slower, neighborhoods felt smaller, and memories seemed to glow a little brighter. Until our next walk together, keep the memories close, keep the stories alive, and let the past remind us of the beauty and the courage that still lives within us today. This has been the Golden Memory Hour, and this chapter is yours.